He didn't pay EMD. The contract's over? Hello, I'm Paul Brown, founder of Real Quick Funds. Before I go any further, let me state that I'm not an attorney and this is absolutely not legal advice. I'm not qualified to give legal advice. EMD, often called good faith deposit, is common in real estate transactions. If it's not paid, is the contract non-binding though? Let's step back and talk about what makes a contract binding. There's 4 really core elements we all talk about, maybe a couple others that are relevant in this case. 1, offer and acceptance. There must be a clear offer. One party offers and a clear acceptance by the other party, right? Creating a mutual agreement. 2, consideration. Each party must exchange something of value. This could be money, services, goods, or it could be a promise to do something or a promise to not do something. Mutual intent is number 3. Both parties must have a mutual intent to enter into a legally binding agreement. It means they understand that their agreement has legal consequences. 4, capacity. Everybody agreeing and being part of the deal has to have legal capacity to enter into a contract, right? A 6-year-old cannot enter into a legal contract. You need to be of age. You need mental competency. You can't be under duress or undue influence. Right? It needs to be proper capacity. Now, there's one more that I think is relevant for real estate. It's proper form. Certain types of contracts must be in writing to be enforceable. Not all. Verbal contracts are valid in the United States in many, many, many different arenas. But in real estate, the contract for the sale of real property must be in writing. There's also some other things like if the contract cannot be performed within a year, it's longer than a year, it needs to be in writing. Or if you're making a contract to sell something, sell goods, then if the amount you're selling is over a certain amount, I think it's really small, like $500, then it needs to be in writing. So there's a number of reasons, but for our purposes, real estate and the sale of real property needs to be in writing. Any verbal agreements to adjust it, anything happening is not valid if it's not in writing in real estate. So we have those things that say, okay, this makes a contract binding. Let's jump to the consideration one. That's the real topic, right? Number 2 was consideration. In a real estate contract, oftentimes we can make the mistake of thinking the only form of consideration is the earnest money deposit. And therefore, if there's no earnest money deposit, it's not a valid contract. It's non-binding, which would be a bad assumption to make because the real estate contract itself, the typical purchase and sell agreement itself, embeds consideration right inside of it. So where the buyer agrees to pay a purchase price in exchange for a property, that's consideration. The seller is promising to vacate a property or deliver possession of the property on a certain date. That's consideration. The seller is transferring the title of the property to the buyer is also a form of consideration. So unlike some contracts, a real estate purchase and sell agreement typically will include consideration right in it. So if EMD is not paid to be consideration, why in the world do we pay EMD? Right? The contract's binding anyway. So before we jump to that question, I want to say each state typically has a court case you can look up that shows where the courts made this very clear, right? And made it clear that EMD is not required as consideration and the contract is still binding without it. Some cases, it's even when the EMD was stated, you'll pay X amount. as EMD, and they never paid it. The contract was still binding, and the court ruled so. If you're interested in any of those cases, if you have a specific state or something you want to see that kind of case, comment below. I'll shoot you a link to a case that talks about those kind of things. It's interesting. So back to, why are we paying it then? What's the point if it's not required to make the contract binding? Well, it's because that's not why we do it. We're not paying EMD to make the contract binding. We're paying EMD because we want to look like a good buyer, or because we want to meet the seller's requirement. The seller says you got to pay EMD, or I don't want to accept your contract. Well, if you're going to spend all that time trying to find a motivated seller, you're certainly going to make sure you close in the end, right? You're definitely not going to let it off the hook because you're unwilling to put in an EMD deposit, one of the most common things in real estate. So not just the seller requiring it, but from us as buyers, we'll stick EMD in. And sometimes we'll put a large amount of EMD in because we want to make a statement that we're a strong buyer. We're serious. We're not kidding around. We want them to trust our offer. We want them to accept it. We put all this work in. We want to make sure we close, right? We get the contract. We get the deal under contract. So those are some of the reasons. There's a myriad of reasons you might want to leverage EMD in purchasing and in that transaction. A point I would like to make is EMD can be consideration, but it is not the only consideration in a deal, and it does not need to be submitted in any state I've looked up. I want to be careful. This is not legal advice, in order to make the contract binding. But what I recommend EMD, 100%. EMD is a powerful way of showing I'm serious about what I'm doing here. And after all this effort I've made to get this far, the last thing I would do is then make myself look like a weak buyer. If I'm going to put all this effort into finding and negotiating a deal, I am certainly going to put down an EMD that says, and I'm serious, right? And that's my recommendation, is forget the legalities of it and think about the business side of it and make sure you close. And if, when that time comes, you need a funding partner, if you're growing your business and you're throwing offers out and needing EMD all the time, give me a ring, call us up, hit our website at realquickfunds.com. We'd love to support you on that side. Shoot me a message, comment below, let us know what you think about this, and we'll talk to you again soon.